the last video uploaded to Wrestling Bios, we took a look at Rick and Scott Steiner's time in WCW from 1988 to 1992. We established that the Steiner Brothers were a popular and hard-hitting tag team, and judging by the comments left on that previous video, we also firmly established that the Steiner Brothers tag team is very fondly remembered today. Let's pick up where we left off. The Steiners had just left WCW due to a pay dispute with Bill Watts, and it was time for Rick and Scott to show their abilities in Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation. Bruce Prichard revealed quite a lot of information regarding the Steiners' WWF debut in November of 1992. It was Pat Patterson and Bruce Prichard who were very high on the Steiner brothers, but more so, both Patterson and Prichard saw Scott Steiner as a possible singles megastar. One has to remember that in 1992, Scott Steiner was an incredibly different wrestler to what he would eventually become later in his career. Scott was an incredibly gifted athlete and was also an innovator in the ring. While Rick Steiner was great in his own right as a no-nonsense, hard-hitting grappler with tons of personality, the WWF in 1992 was all about the look, and Scott Steiner had the look. When it became knowledge that the Steiner brothers had left WCW, an idea was pitched to Vince McMahon for Scott Steiner to come into the WWF as a surprise entrant in the 1993 Royal Rumble match. But that's not all. Not only would Scott Steiner enter the Royal Rumble, he would win the whole thing and go on to WrestleMania 9 to win the WWF Championship. This is all according to Bruce Prichard on his podcast. One would assume then that WrestleMania 9 potentially could have featured champion Bret Hart versus Scott Steiner, with Scott Steiner getting the win. Maybe. The idea of Scott winning the Royal Rumble did not sit well with Vince McMahon, nor did it sit well with the Steiners. It's been revealed that Scott voiced his opinion and he wanted the Steiners to remain as a tag team, something that Vince McMahon agreed with. Scott also said he didn't want his brother Rick lost in the mid-card or lower mid-card while he had a glorious singles run, something Scott should be commended for. While, of course, Scott and Rick would go into solo runs later in their careers, in 1992 when the Steiners joined the WWF, they wanted to remain a tag team, and this is exactly what happened. So instead of the surprise debut of Scott Steiner at the 1993 Royal Rumble, the Steiners started a little earlier in the WWF. The brothers made their TV debuts in an interview on the December 21st, 1992 edition of Primetime, but unfortunately these later editions of Primetime are yet to make their way to the WWE Network, but footage of this interview is available on YouTube. The Steiners laid down a challenge to the Beverly brothers, but before getting to the Beverlys though, on January 11th, 1993, the Steiners appeared on the very first episode of Monday Night Raw, where they defeated the Executioners. At the 1993 Royal Rumble, the Steiners faced the Beverly brothers in their WWF pay-per-view debut, scoring the win and gaining the crowd's approval in the process. This match is notable for being quite hard-hitting. There's some insane clotheslines and the Frankensteiner at the end of the match looked quite scary. In saying this, I don't put all the blame on the Steiners for a single moment, as some of this was down to bad landings. Still, this match is worth a watch. WrestleMania 9 was up next and the Steiners would be squaring off against the Headshrinkers. This match is terribly underrated, almost to the point of being totally forgotten, and it's a shame because the Steiner Brothers versus the Headshrinkers was an excellent match. It's just unfortunate that it's included on one of the more unfavourable WrestleMania events. The combination of the Headshrinkers and the Steiners made for a real intense and at times dangerous match, something rarely seen in the WWF during this time period. There's an incredible spot where Rick Steiner reverses a Doomsday device by performing a power slam on Samu while Fatu has Rick on his shoulders, something that still looks incredible today. In the end, the Steiners picked up the win here. After these impressive victories, the Steiners became contenders for the WWF Tag Team titles, currently being held by Money Incorporated. The night after King of the Ring 93, the Steiners defeated Money Inc. and captured the titles. They did lose the belts back to IRS and Ted DiBiase at a house show in June, but regained the titles the following week at another house show. So in a short time, the Steiners had become two-time tag team champs in the WWF. Fast forward to SummerSlam 93 and the Steiners were booked to defend their titles against the Heavenly Bodies. And yeah, the Heavenly Bodies got bodied by Rick and Scott. This match took place in Michigan, so obviously the crowd was well behind the Steiner Brothers. The Bodies done well early in keeping Scott Steiner away from his corner, but when Scott eventually reaches Rick for the hot tag, the Steiners quickly lay in some serious offense that has the crowd on their feet. A fun match for sure, and something you may have noticed so far in this video is that the Steiners seemed incapable of having bad matches within the WWF, much like their earlier WCW run. The Steiners dropped the titles to the Quebecers on the September 13th episode of Monday Night Raw thanks to Johnny Polo, the manager of the Quebecers. The match was quite odd in that the titles could change hands via disqualification, and the Steiners ended up losing via DQ when Scott used a hockey stick that was introduced to the match by Polo. After all the good work Rick and Scott had put into their WWF run so far, for me it was quite disappointing to see them lose the titles in this fashion. After competing in the main event at Survivor Series 93, where the Steiners were part of Lex Luger's All-American team, Rick and Scott had arguably their greatest ever WWF match. Rick and Scott took on Bret Hart and Owen Hart, a match released on the WrestleFest 94 home video. This is a low-key classic tag match with both teams giving a masterclass in the fundamentals of tag wrestling while also kicking it up a gear with innovative moves. A rare sight is Scott Steiner performing the Steiner screwdriver on Owen Hart during the bout, a move Scott only really used in Japan and is basically a suplex into a pile driver. A dangerous move for sure, but Owen and Scott made it look effortless. The match ends in a double countout at the 25-minute mark, but even with the weak finish, this is still highly recommended. Unfortunately, the match is not on the WWE network at present, as the last WrestleFest video release is from 93 on the network, but a quick Google search will let you see the Harts vs the Steiners from January of 94. Once you're done watching this video, go have a look for it, you won't be disappointed. As a tag team, I feel the match with Bret and Owen was the last great thing the Steiners done in the WWF. The brothers entered the 1994 Royal Rumble, but neither won the match. They wrestled a few more times in 1994, but they were not used as much as what they previously were. Scott Steiner lost a King of the Ring qualifier in April 94 to IRS, and this would be the last time we would see the Steiner brothers in the WWF, at least until Scott made a comeback in late 2002. The Steiner brothers' run in WWF, I feel, was extremely good for the short period of time they were there. Why Vince McMahon didn't work things out to keep Rick and Scott during this time period is beyond me. Rick Steiner said that the brothers left the WWF due to McMahon failing to live up to promises he made with the Steiners when they signed their contracts. Rick and Scott went back to New Japan Pro Wrestling and also made some appearances in ECW before returning to WCW. Scott and Rick got on well with Paul Heyman, so the Steiners had a few matches in the land of Extreme. Rick and Scott only stayed with ECW for 3 months, but their matches there are worth a look. A recommended match from this time period would be the Steiners teaming up with Eddie Guerrero to take on Cactus Jack, Too Cold Scorpio and Dean Malenko. On March 11th, 1996, the Steiners made their comeback to WCW to take on the Road Warriors. Their return was a surprise, as the Road Warriors were initially set to take on the Nasty Boys, but the Steiners made their way to the ring instead. The match was quite good, but something that should be noted here is how much Scott Steiner had grown since he was in the WWF. Scott's upper body size had increased considerably, and he would only continue to get bigger as the months went on. Scott was still capable here of pulling off the athletic moves we knew him for, but as the months went on and as Scott increased in size, his athletic ability took a hit. In the end, the match ended due to some underhanded tactics from the Road Warriors, meaning the Steiners took a loss. The Steiner Brothers got some new theme music in WCW, and I'm going to admit it, I used to like this theme. Steinerized was one of those WCW themes that was instantly recognisable when it played in arenas, but man, those opening lyrics didn't age well. The song starts off with the words, "Here's the story of two brothers, Rick and Scott. They don't use drugs and they're always on top." Yeah, still, I think the Steinerized theme was much better than the previous victory songs the Steiners had previously used in WCW and in WWF. Moving on, the Steiners initially feuded with Harlem Heat over the WCW tag titles during their first months back in WCW. The matches between the Steiners and Harlem Heat, I think, were the last exceptional matches the Steiners had as a team. Sure, the Steiners would begin feuding with the Outsiders, but Harlem Heat and the Steiners were two extremely proficient tag teams who knew how to work tag matches. Their matches were fun and some of the best tag matches in WCW during this time. The Steiners even defeated Harlem Heat for the WCW tag titles but dropped them again shortly after, all this happening on house shows and was never mentioned on TV. They did end up winning the tag titles though at NWO Sold Out when the Steiners defeated Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. Scott Steiner missed some TV time due to injury, but when he returned, the Steiners resumed their feuds with Harlem Heat and the Outsiders. Only now, Scott Steiner had grew even more in the space of a few months. Also during this time, Ted DiBiase would side with the Steiners, becoming their manager. As 1997 progressed though, things would start going south for the brothers. Scott was beginning a slow heel turn, and by the end of the year, he was blaming Rick when the Steiners lost and even refusing to tag his brother into matches. At Super Brawl 8, Scott attacked Rick and abandoned his brother during a match against the Outsiders, and thus the Steiner brothers were no more and Scott Steiner joined the New World Order. The night after Super Brawl 8, Scott debuted his new look that most modern fans are now accustomed to, as Scotty Steiner turned into a sort of superstar Billy Graham character. As time went on, Scott Steiner added even more muscle mass, which significantly hindered his once innovative and breathtaking athletic ability. The brothers stayed in WCW until the doors closed in 2001, with Rick going on to work in New Japan while Scott went to work for World Wrestling All-Stars. In 2002, the Steiners reunited in New Japan and had 3 matches there, and the duo also reunited on a few smaller independent shows. The Steiners once again got together in TNA in 2007, where they feuded with Team 3D, but the brothers weren't the same superstars they had once been. And that's it really for the Steiner brothers. What I hope is conveyed over these past 2 videos is that the Steiners were one of the greatest tag teams to ever step into a ring. Scott Steiner, these days, is remembered for his run as Big Papa Pump, the Big Bad Booty Daddy, and his wrestling abilities and mic work have come under fire quite often by modern fans. He has become the subject of memes, and that Sacrifice 2008 math promo will be stuck with Steiner forever. Scott's singles career has somewhat weakened the legacy of the Steiner brothers, I feel, as the word Steiner in wrestling instantly makes people think of the Big Papa Pump character. But I do hope some of the younger fans who watch these videos are now inspired to go back and watch the Steiner brothers and see just how innovative both Rick and Scott were as a team.